So I am Tonia Dudley. I work with Cofense. For the last 4 years, I have been the strategic advisor, which means I get to meet with, I'm sure I've talked to many of you out there about your phishing programs, awareness, incident response. But on Monday, I got a promotion. So, um, so now I have a whole new set of things that I get to do what Amanda talked about this morning. So I'm looking forward to that, but I'm still going to get to talk to you guys. But in 2011, when I was tapped by our director that ran our managed the awareness program under him, he said, Tanya, you keep telling us that we're doing this wrong. You should come run our awareness program. When I was at Honeywell. And I just got back into a technical role. Okay, fine, but the only way I'm going to do it is if you let me go take the SANS 2-day class so I can learn what it is that I need to do. So yeah, I've been doing this ever since then. And so I've always stayed networked with this community. I love this community, right? So I've enjoyed getting to come over and over and over again and be with some of the veterans back at the table over there that I enjoy being with. So what I'm going to cover today is business email compromise. And in some regions, so, I know some of you are global, and so we have to be conscious of what it means in other regions. I know in the UK, it can be called CEO fraud. I recently saw a BEC group taken down and they called it invoice scamming something. I don't know. I'm like, we're creating terms about this over and over again. So I'm going to talk about the damages. I'm going to talk about music, voodoo, and human sacrifices. I'm going to slide right over that really fast because I don't like to use FUD. But I think if you can kind of see where this has gone and what's kind of behind all this thing, besides just a, hey, do you have a moment email? There's actually a whole big threat actor group that sits behind this. And then why we need to collaborate. And then I'm going to give you some, recommendations on how you can help your organization protect against these. So like I said, definition, business email compromise. So we tend to see fake invoices, check fraud, direct deposit schemes, asking, hey, can I need to change my bank account on my payroll, executive spoofing. They've kind of shied away from using the executive spoofing. They've learned how your hierarchy works and that low-level managers also get responded to as well. And then task-based requests, which will go into these. So the threat actors are getting really, really good. And just like any other type of phishing campaign, they tune their messaging, right? Their tactics that they are going after. I just was reading the IBM data breach, cost of a data breach report that just came out last week. And they had BEC and phishing right next to each other. I'm like, oh, that's interesting because everybody else just lumps it into one big bucket. So we're going to kind of go through this. And so when we look at BEC losses, it's quite large, right? So every year the FBI puts out the IC3 report and we're up to over $40 billion. And this is only what people have reported and only what they've reported to the FBI. That's not the global number. It doesn't include unemployment fraud, which some of this is tied to. SBA, which is Small Business Association fraud, right? Especially during COVID, when we saw a lot of grants and money being given to small organizations, small businesses to help keep afloat. And then we see this over 100,000 romance victims, and I'm going to kind of tell you how that all plays together. Meanwhile, ransomware might hit 21 billion. So if anybody follows Ronnie, which I'll get to in a moment, I wanted to mention that the romance victims, more than 50% of those are over the age of 50, right? And so they tend to go after our aging adult community, right? Because they're lonely. It's all about engaging and building up this long-term relationship to leverage them to kind of be their feet on the ground to move money around. And then here's some of the crimes that BEC is linked to. So I talked about invoices and with Cofense, we see that the number one theme that we see in phishing campaigns is finance transactions related, right? So invoices, payments, purchase order, and credential theft, as Kathy even mentioned this morning, credential phish is the top thing that we see right now. So, and actually we see BEC linked to some of that as we're starting to put all these pieces together. You can see all these on the right-hand side are a little bit more edgy, right? But there is a link to these crimes leveraging business email compromise. So I do like to give a shout out to our researcher, Ronnie, who has spent many, many years digging into this. I oftentimes have to tap Ronnie and say, hey, how you doing? Because he tends to take the empathy of the victim side, and he gets very tied into how they got taken, really digging into their story. And, you know, he really does empathize with the amount of money that they've lost. But he's been doing this for quite a while. And, you know, if anybody that's done forensics or some of the digital crimes that we had back in the, you know, early days of the internet, you might refer to them as the 419 scams. And that's kind of where he's been. Like, we just write those off as, you know, the Nigerian prince scam, right? But I love his last bullet that he has here is the Nigerian prince grew up to be king with all the money that he has taken over. And by the way, these are his slides, so I apologize for all the memes that are in here. It's not only, I always joke that whenever I do a webinar with my boss, I create all the slides and it's slide roulette for him. He shows up and just talks to whatever I put on the slide. So that's pretty much what I've done with these slides. But Ronnie and I have done this a few times now, so I hope that you'll get something from this. So business focused fraud, right? That's probably what most of you are all dealing with in your organization, right? We see the traditional BEC CEO fraud. It does overlap to some consumer fraud. And the actors are following the money, right? It's for them, it's all about how can they get payment. And they are using different pretexts to get to that same goal. And we see many different categories, right? Direct deposit scams. Hey, I asking payroll. I need to update my my bank information, right? I just changed banks. We traditionally see them asking for the same thing, right? And as we, you know, we can tune our security controls to look for keywords in emails. And so that's gotten good. But you know what that threat actor said? I can change the way my message reads. And so even as we train our users or our HR and payroll teams to, hey, you know what, use the portal, right, to do your self-service of changing your bank account. What's interesting is that a few weeks ago, I actually found an email that was a BEC that the threat actor had said, hey, I tried to use the online portal, but it wouldn't work for me. Can you just change it for me? So, you know, they're starting to learn, oh, they don't do it this way. They have other ways that they change their payroll deposit. So I'm going to use the lingo that they're used to, right? So it always comes down to your users being aware of what's currently being said. And, you know, even though we do phishing simulation, these are the most difficult to actually simulate because there's no links, there's no attachment. It's just a conversation. And it can go on for several threads before they actually ask for the thing. So those are also hard to get to detect. So it comes down to that human intuition to go, okay, something's not right here, right? I need to just report this, get rid of it, right? And it can take weeks to identify. They are very patient. Another common one that we see is this gift card fraud. I have an urgent task. I need to get some gift cards for my niece's birthday. I missed it. I'm late. Or hey, welcome to the company. We are giving you some gift cards. And this is the same thing that we see that happens over SMS too, right? Now, why is it that they go after these gift cards? And they start with the ones that they know that they can trade the highest for on the Bitcoin exchanges, the Bitcoin exchanges, excuse me. So, you know, they'll start with the Google Play or the Apple ones. Those are the ones that get the highest exchange rates. But then if they can't get those, then they're willing to negotiate. Well, okay, can you give me some Amazon, right? Like they're willing to just negotiate whatever it is. Because at the end of the day, they just want that money, right? They've engaged you. You're willing to take this task and go get them the gift cards. And it also makes it, you know, there's no motivation in reporting this stuff, right? Because it's okay, we didn't, you know, we stopped them, right? We didn't buy the gift cards. So it just kind of dies right there. W-2 scams. So what do they do with all these W-2 scams, right? They'll, this tends to be in tax time of the year. I know for myself, when I ran my awareness program every February, March, right, that I would remind our payroll and HR staff, hey, remember, you're going to be asked to send out the W-2 file to someone. There's no reason to send that to anyone. There's no value. Nobody's should be asking for the W-2 file. But what can they do with that, right? Then they can sell those SSNs underground. They can make personal transactions. And sometimes we even see them file taxes on behalf. When I was presenting this in Arizona, there was a colleague that I had in the room that I had known. He actually had somebody file his taxes for him and had gone through that whole trying to, deal with the IRS that, it wasn't him that filed those taxes, can he get his money? And it took a while to untangle all of that. So it can be very complex for the individual when they're dealing with that type of fraud. Aging report. So this is something that we've seen over the last couple of years. So what can they do with an aging report? So if you think about what an aging report has on it, right? It has the amount of money that's due, who the contact information is, maybe a point of contact with the company name. So what we have seen, and I actually talked to a CISO that had to work with his vendor management team that said, we will not pay people when they have recently changed bank accounts. So he's putting a 3-day pause on anything that came in for changes because he wanted them to validate that the bank change was correct. Because what happened is that the threat actor stood up a lookalike domain, had a web page and everything that looked legitimate. So the finance team, they got this, you need to change your bank information, send us the invoice, here's the email address. But it wasn't really them. And so they were out that money that they had spent, sent to that new account. So that was, while this isn't a cyber crime, right? Or an information security, at the end of the day, it's because it comes through email. So we're stuck in the middle of, dealing with these scams that happen. Invoice fraud. So if you look at this email, and Kathy talked a little bit about this morning, and I want to kind of poke on that a little bit. But somebody asked about the difficulty and the number of flags. But if you look at this email, so what we see with Credential Phish is that they lie in wait in the inbox. They look at sent messages. They look at things that have come in, and then they leverage those emails to then send on with changing the reply to come back to them. So if you look at this email, it looks legitimate. You're replying to some conversation that has already taken place. So there really wouldn't be any clues there. And then I want to talk to Nandita, who talked about, what are some of the flags? But what she didn't have on there was that emotional spidey sense to detect this doesn't feel right, right? So at the end of the day, it still comes down to your intuition and taking your time to kind of really assess, should I be looking at this? Should I be paying this? So we call these conversation hijack threads. We've seen them even forge invoices and purchase orders as if the legitimate company had sent them in to go after that money. So again, there's in this particular conversation, there's no email, there's no link, and there's no attachment, but then it continues on later. And we'll get into that when I go over some of the research that we did specifically on the BEC. All right, so Credential Phish, I kind of talked a little bit about how this is the number one thing that we see. The threat actors use, BEC actors use credential phishing emails, and we're starting to see some of these groups that are taken down by law enforcement and having this tie and how they're able to kind of start to put all of the actors together and kind of, take them down. But it's still, it's like the mafia, right? The mob, where it's kind of an infiltrated group that it's hard to really get to the center of these threat actors. They steal these credentials, they buy and sell them, they reuse them. What we also see is that they set up email forwarding rules within the inbox. So while you may tell your user to reset their password because you've given away your credentials, you also need to make sure that there's no forwarding emails or forwarding rules in their Outlook. And I've seen organizations now start to configure their Outlook to not allow forwarding messages outside of the organization to kind of mitigate that. Also for insider threat and data leakage, right? There's plenty of good reasons why you should implement that, but this is one thing that we do see is that they're still persistent in that inbox even after the password has been reset. So there is this connection to the consumer side of it, right? So this is where we start to get into the romance scam. So the general public is being used for money mules, right? So they want to be able to have access to the money. They need to be able to move the money, right? So not only are they into Bitcoin, but they are also into moving this money around. When Ronnie first started studying this in 2015, he started up this BEC working group. And what they did is he was able to network with the financial services ISAC. And because they all are the ones that have access to review the bank information, they all started saying, hey, responding to the threat actor saying, okay, what account did you want me to move that to? And then they would start tracking the bank accounts, and then they would feed that off to the financial service team and say, hey, can you go take this down and give this off to your fraud team and have them mark this as a fraudulent account. So they did that so frequently. That's why they have shifted to the gift card and Bitcoin. We don't see it as much anymore where they're using these money mules to move cash around, but they are still using them to move some other things around. And then I mentioned check fraud, right? So they're targeting consumers to, selling products online for classified ads. I hear horror stories about Facebook Marketplace and Craigslist and how do you sell this stuff, right? Getting them to, they're trying to sell, try and buy and sell stuff using fake checks. And then the work from home victims. This has gone very deep. When I had to have Ronnie go over this with me, I'm like, okay, are you sure this is what's really happening? Yes. Okay, so, and we've even seen, in the news over the last probably month or so, how, candidates have had done interviews for, companies over Zoom, and it's not the real person. There's been some very isolated cases of that. They purchased printers and laptops, and then they are having them reshipping scams and W-2 scams. But that's basically what they're kind of using these work from home people. They just sit at their computer all day. They do these transactions, not knowing that what's driving their transactions is the threat actors that are all part of this network of BEC criminals and threat actors. So here we are, romance scams and BECs. Because they need these money mules, because they need people to be able to move things around. If you all saw the Tinder Swindler, I'm assuming by now many of you have seen the Tinder Swindler. And we all watch that and go, how could she really fall for that, right? Like, how could she? But what you don't see is that they groom these, and we saw it a little bit in the show, right? Where they groom them for over a long period of time. They're very patient, right? As Ronnie has mentioned here, sometimes 2.5 years, over 10 years. He's seen victims that have been in this relationship for many, many years without realizing it. And also when I mentioned the aging population, right, our elderly community that's lonely, they just, they go to these online dating sites, right, because they just want some companionship, right? And so they will take their time to nurture that relationship to be able to do these transactions over time, many, many times. So that's kind of how they've built this infrastructure to now be able to move some of this money around and help them with getting the money back to them from the victims to this interim person who might be a romance victim. So that human element, right? They are really engaged with them, right? They send in them legitimate pictures, and we all, when I first saw the picture on the lower right-hand side there, I'm like, okay, yeah, that looks legitimate. But then as they started to peel it back and showed that he actually photoshopped himself into that family picture, I was like, okay, it looks legitimate, right? And that's the thing is, and even the we got beat up, right? Even that story was a fake, right? So, but that's the extent that these threat actors will do, right? They'll go to the extent of having real pictures. Hey, you're at dinner. Can you send me a picture of what's your meal look like, right? So they have this ongoing exchange with them. Oftentimes they will try and get them off the platform, right? Because now that these platforms are starting to tune and look for these threat actors, they will immediately say, hey, how about we text on WhatsApp, or, just, give me your phone number. Let's just chat over text instead of on the platform, right? Because then they can go undetected, which is also why in some of the emails that we see, right, the threat actor will say, hey, can you text me? I'm away. Can you text me so that I can have you do this task for me? Because then they can go undetected in that conversation. So this is where Ronnie starts to go down on the empathy of the victim side. So the victims are in this, they really believe that they're in this relationship, right? We saw that with Tinder Swindler. Psychologically, it's the same as being abused, except, they're not publicly shamed, or they're shunned by their families, right? And so a lot of these, when Ronnie is, dealing with, or we see these romance victims that are, in the aging adult community, right? They oftentimes won't talk about it, right? But their behaviors might change. And so there's some nuances that, in working with Lisa, I'm like, we need to start getting some public information out that people can then help families that are in our age, right? Looking at our parents to see, looks for some indicators or where they might recognize that maybe there's something going on that, you should dig into to kind of see if there's something going on that maybe they might be part of this being a victim. All right. So they are social engineering them, right? So they're showing them empathy. They want to help others. They're trying to get them to help, to be motivated. But emotionally, they do have a hard time with this. So like I said, I'm not going to go too deep into this, but yes, the Yahoo Boys. I don't know if anybody had seen this story a few years ago when Hush Puppy was taken down, and yes, ultimately it does all lead back to Nigeria. I know we all joke about it, but that actually is where a lot of these come from. They all see this, right? And they want to have that same lifestyle. So how do they do that? They get involved with these crime groups to be a part of this. And this is where I'm going to go really fast, because yes, there is actual, the people that are the threat actors that groom these people to help with their, carry on their threats. They tell them that if you come and, do these things, these rituals, that you will then become successful as, the Yahoo Boys, right? Some of those other well-known ones, they even will rap about it. We see some of these pictures, right? On social media, they're not afraid to hide the money and their findings that they have. They're bragging about it. They're writing it in their songs. There's even some songs that you can hear about it. Yeah, so people are trying to, just get by, and they'll do whatever they can, right? So, all right, so I'm going to go into this research project that we did. So in 2015, this was the very first email that we saw that was BEC. And so Ronnie actually worked for us at that time. We were a very, very small company. Rohit is one of our co-founders. Sam is our CFO. He comes running into Ronnie and Aaron Higby, my boss and co-founder, and said, what are you guys going to do about this? This didn't come from Rohit. He doesn't use an iPhone. But fast forward, this is asking for them to, wire transfer, right? This is what we saw in the beginning. They were asking for that money to be wired to them. And when we look at what we see today, right, it's shifted a little bit, but it's still just those one line simple. They're still spoofing, an executive sometimes. They're actually doing the research. So I've done many BEC talks over the last couple of years, and one of the talks that I did, actually, we did a talk internally for our sales team to kind of get them up to speed on what this is. So I dug into one of our customers' instance, and I found some real BEC messages, and I said, okay, this came from so and so to so and so. The person was spoofing somebody to the payroll department. So I went on LinkedIn and I actually found that person. She legitimately worked in LinkedIn or in the HR department of that company. So everything about it seemed very legit. Thank goodness that Microsoft has started to display the full email address, right? And there was a time when you couldn't see this on your phone, and that's why we've added, when you start to see organizations start tagging external mail, this is really where it becomes useful, because this is one of those clues to show, this wasn't from somebody internal to your organization, even though maybe they're spoofing those. So what Ronnie set out to do in this project was to see how many emails does it take, how many clicks does it take to get to the center of the lollipop. So how many times does it take on average before they actually start asking for the money, the action, what it is that they want you to do. So how many responses did it take? So they found 112 threads. So no extra responses were needed, that they would just, the initial email, 35 of them said, yep, this is what I need you to do. But then if you look further down, then we see, okay, the first response. So then they waited for that second, that follow-up to say what it was that they needed. And then the second, and then the fourth and the third, right? So there's quite a few that it took. And we actually have, I'm going to pin it to the channel. We actually did a full write-up on this report, on this research. I'll pin it to the channel so that you guys can research it. I know I was talking to somebody yesterday, I think Cindy from Walmart, where she really loves to dig into our threat intelligence reports so that she can, when she's running her program, right, to know what is real and get a better understanding of what the threat actors are seeing. And so we have lots of content that you can kind of just dig in a little bit and get familiar with what you're seeing. So as I mentioned, direct deposit is a very common one that we see. And this is very common. I need you to change your bank details. And that's where I went into. So what also Ronnie did was he just took these emails from our customer's environment and put them into one of our research email systems. And he just replied back to it. He wasn't the same person that initially sent, or that it was sent to, right? So another clue that they really don't care. They just, if somebody's communicating with them, they don't care if it's the person they sent it to, or they don't keep track of all that, right? It's not that sophisticated. They're just in a loop of scripting of, okay, they responded, so here's what I say next, and here's what I say next. So imagine your help desk, and they have to pull up their knowledge base, right? And what's the script that they're given? That's exactly what a lot of these threat actors are doing in how they go after, their series of events that they go through. So here's just an example of kind of, how the email started and how they responded to, they went back and forth. What's even more interesting is that I think at one point they created a fake invoice. This was a fake company that we just have a domain for in our research group. And so they created a fake invoice for one of our domains that we actually own, they don't own. So it really kind of validated what the CISO had shared with us on, how they started to go after, them targeting some of their spoofing their supply chain, right? So this is where, we talk about the supply chain threats. It happens also, they target the small businesses, right, to make their way into a bigger organization. I don't know if Jeremy's going to share his story later, but he shared the same story where he went to a customer and, they had a really well-known established relationship. They weren't getting payments, and they happened to mention, hey, you haven't paid us in a couple months. And he said, yeah, I actually have been. So it really becomes really important for you to make sure that your finance teams all understand what to look for and to follow their process, which I'm going to go into that in a moment. So as my last little example here, before I go into what are some things that you can do to help protect your organization when it comes to BEC. So we all know that when we have our friends and family conversations and they want to tell you their story about their cybersecurity incident, right, on the internet, so my friend Ruth says, about cybersecurity, Tonia, I want to tell you about this email that I got. And I'm like, okay, I know exactly where you're going. I'm going to listen. So Ruth, this was a month into her brand new job. She's the COO at this small business. Mark is her CEO boss. He was out of town. He was on vacation that week, and she knew that. And so she got this email and it said, hey, I need you to do something for me, right? So she responds to him on the text message, right? She gives him the number to text. They go back and forth. Because of course, when she tells me this, I'm like, can you give me screenshots of those text messages? Because I'd really like to see what went back and forth here. And so then when I shared this with Ronnie, he was really impressed that she took pictures of all the gift cards that were in the gift card aisle because they didn't have the gift card that they were asking for. And she's like, well, I can run to Safeway. I don't need to go, like I'm at Target, but if you want me to go to Safeway, I can get that card if that's what you want. Because she really at that time thought she was talking to her boss. And he's like, no, it's okay. Let's just see what you have there. Okay, go ahead and give me 2 pieces, like even the language, right? Give me 2 pieces of Google. Okay, so she's going right along, but she's like, I'm like asking my coworkers, nobody's given me any good responses. Okay, here's what I got for you. Okay, now I need you to scratch off the card, right? I need you to scratch off the code and then send me the code. So she pays for them. She's in the parking lot. She scratches off and she's like, I'm going to call him. I just need to call him. And she's like, she calls him and he's like, Ruth, I'm on vacation. Why would I ask you to do this? She's like, well, I didn't know if maybe you're using your personal Gmail accounts because you didn't take your work phone with you. So of course I'm like, how'd that make you feel, Ruth? Oh, so pissed, right? But now imagine, okay, so she's a PhD educated executive, new to a company, right? So, and we're hearing this more and more. They're going after your new hire. So making sure that you're doing, I'm going to talk about that in a minute when I get to like, how do we acknowledge and mitigate this, right? So one of the things, and I made the mistake when I was in Scottsdale, I had the Secret Service coming up after me and I said, you know what, nobody's doing anything about this because that's what Ronnie says, but they actually are, but we have to report it, right? So even those simple little emails, right? They don't know about them, right? But law enforcement actually is doing stuff that we don't know. They are trying to get as much from me as they can. Banks, they write some of this stuff off because they have an allocation that they just automatically know that we're going to have fraud losses. So it just kind of goes in that lump. And you're not the only victim, right? So report it to the IC3. The FBI has set up on the IC3 website, I think it's ic3.gov. For you to report all of these, right? Even if there isn't a loss, right? Because we can't do anything without knowing about these. The beauty of what we're able to do is because we're able to look across several of our customers, we can correlate what we're seeing and we see some of those same threat actors like going after different pockets, right? So it's still important to tell your users to report these. Now, what your security organization does, then we need to kind of work, okay, should we report these to the FBI? There's all this, should we report, not report? And it's always about education, right? So these are not easy. There's no way to really simulate these very well, right? Because there's no link, there's no attachment, but it really does come down to making sure that your users know what to look for. And then collaboration, right? So if you do as an organization are seeing, the same email addresses being used, or maybe handing them over to your local law enforcement, because the Secret Service, when we met with them in Scottsdale, they are actually looking at these, right? So if you can hand them off to your Secret Service team, they can do that back end correlation to see, is there something happening across multiple companies with the same theme, with the same email address, that sort of thing. And we have been seeing, if you have paid attention to any of the DOJ announcements over the last few years, we have actually taken down pockets of these threat actor groups, right? And we just got to keep going after them, continuously reporting these and working together to bring them down. Like I said, collaboration. And then, so this is big, right? We talked about the dollar amount, share and collaborate, educate your employees. So one of the things that I always tell people is make sure that your CEO or even your senior leaders, as they're doing their all hands meeting with their teams, make sure that they tell them, I will never ask you to go get me gift cards. I will never ask you to do these things. When I was in, we actually have a vendor that we use that the CEO said, hey, can you guys help me out? We have an employee that's been interacting with the threat actor for 6 months. And he's given over money, iPhones, a lot of stuff. And he never he finally just broke and told somebody in his company that, hey, I've been doing all this stuff for the CEO. but he hasn't acknowledged that this is really him. What's interesting is as I was having this conversation of more of the backstory, he said, you know what, we finally brought everybody back to the office. I'd go in and this guy was sitting off to the side and he'd kind of like look at me kind of funny. He goes, now I realized he was looking for me to go, okay, yeah, I got you, buddy. Yeah, you're helping me out, right? He's like, and then I find out that he bought iPhones. I just lost I damaged my iPhone. I could have used that iPhone, right? So now this unfortunate employee is out all his money because, so anyways, it's a big story, but but that's what we hear throughout organizations, right? Is so just making sure that you're constantly reminding your users that it's report that, right? And don't be afraid. And if you've given out money, right, make sure we know about it. That you have to work through those policies yourself as far as reimbursement or losses, but making sure that you're reporting that to the FBI, no matter how small or large the loss is. I'm going to pin this up in the channel, but we have some resources available for your awareness month. If you're looking for anything, I know Lisa's going to talk about a lot more, but we have some phishing related stuff there that we're giving out free. So I know I'll answer questions in the channel.